Welcome to a NASA Live Chat. I'm Tabitha Thompson, lucky to be sitting with Sunita Williams and Bob Behnken, two of the 4 astronauts selected to train for test flights on NASA's Commercial Crew program. We've been collecting questions from NASA's social channels using the Ask NASA hashtag. We had an enthusiastic response, which we were very excited about, and we're still accepting questions, so we invite people to still send those in. The first question is going to Bob, and that is from Twitter user Ian. What would be your elevator pitch for NASA and the Commercial Crew program?
Let's see, my elevator pitch for NASA and the Commercial Crew program is that we're really trying to develop new vehicles to give us an alternative to the Soyuz for transportation to the space station. It's really important to have that capability out of the United States, and looking forward to the days when that happens.
Excellent. And why is it important to the future of human spaceflight to have this Commercial Crew program?
So it involves, of course, astronauts launching from here, the United States, and we can share that with all the people who are here. But it also involves, the public and all the companies out there who are developing new technologies for new spacecraft. So it reaches a lot farther to the public here in the United States. And then that, of course, is accompanied with the kids in this country who are getting ready to potentially follow in our footsteps, and enforces the science, technology, engineering, and math part of that. So we're looking forward to coming back to the United States to launch here.
And you're working with the commercial partners, both Boeing and SpaceX, through the final phases of development and certification of their respective spacecraft. Could you walk us through a little bit why that's important that you be involved and what that means for the program itself?
From our perspective, it's really important that we have as many people as possible with some spaceflight experience to help inform the designs that the two partners are coming up with. So both SpaceX and Boeing have a lot of great experience, but our role is to really help them anticipate some challenges that they might face when they actually get these vehicles into space, make sure that they fit well into the way that we have the International Space Station operating today. There are some things that maybe they don't have as much experience with that we can bring to the table. For example, Sunny's Soyuz experience and how we deal with emergency response on board space station and crews going off to come home on a Soyuz. Well, we'll have to change that a little bit with one crew going off to a Soyuz and another crew going off to another vehicle. And so that's the experience that we bring, and it's going to be critical to making these vehicles successful.
Okay. I think that's a great point in your involvement in understanding that. And then we talk a little bit about, or we've talked quite a bit about the significance of having these 2 different systems. Why is it important that we have 2 systems?
So it's great that we have a couple different companies involved in all of this, and this, of course, was down-selected from other companies who are also bidding for this as well. And what's neat about having a bunch of companies interested is it involves more people, and there's competition, and that means that things are developing on a rapid pace, and they're trying to do as best as they can. So it's really nice to have more than one company doing this. It also, we have a backup for each other, in case we have any issues along the way. We have 2 companies out there working toward this goal to get us back to launch here.
It really spurs the innovation, and I think that's really the driver for what we're trying to accomplish here, is spurring that innovation as we develop these new vehicles.
And you've 3 months in now as selectees for the Commercial Crew program. What have your days looked like so far working with these partners?
Our days have been really busy, Tabitha. For me, there's always something more to learn. We're just catching up on these vehicles, understanding where the designs are and where they're going. I've had some weeks where I spent the first half of the week in Florida, maybe looking at some Boeing equipment or a launch facility, and then traveled to Hawthorne, and then been out in Southern California working with the folks out there, or even in Southern California, maybe seeing something associated with the Boeing design one morning and then driving out to SpaceX later in that afternoon. And so really seeing these designs side by side and helping us understand where the requirements that we've put together make sense to apply to both partners is really critical.
And you're both test pilots, and so that plays a significant role in your involvement in these. Could you talk a little bit about how your test pilot experience has played into it and will continue to play into the development?
Sure. So, there's some fundamentals that you learn at test pilot school, and part of that is approaching the envelope in a stepwise process, and I think that's what sort of we bring to the table. In any space flight or aircraft flight, you know, you're reaching and reaching and reaching farther and trying to understand how this machine is going to work. So I think, and part of that is understanding how well things fly and trying to put that into or allow our past experiences to bring that to these spacecraft right here. So part of it is understanding the risks that you're taking when you're advancing along those edges and taking those steps, and understanding that you have a backup plan and how you're going to work to accomplish those goals. So I think that's just the background of test piloting, and we bring that to the table here.
I would say for me, after graduating from the test pilot school as a flight test engineer, it really is an exercise in risk management. And as we develop new vehicles, we'll have to make decisions about when is good enough and when we need to actually make changes for safety or for other reasons as we go forward. And so that methodology that's instilled in the four of us from that time that we spent at the test pilot schools, I think is really going to serve us well going forward.
And we're talking about these two vehicles, and before we came in here today, we were talking a little bit about why it's such an exciting time with all of these vehicles in development. Could you explain why that's so significant at this point?
So this is the first time in both Bob's and my career that we've actually had a new spacecraft. Both of us have flown in space, but on the space shuttle and the Russian Soyuz, and those had been developed, and we've jumped into the training program of getting, you know, to fly those spacecraft. This is where we're actually being part of the process as these spacecraft are being developed. So we're involved in both of the ones that are being developed for commercial crew, and this is also allowing NASA to focus their attention on developing Orion. So right now, even though it seems a little quiet at the Kennedy Spaceport, it's ramping up to be pretty busy in the near future, and we're going to have to integrate all these different types of spacecraft into the traffic model going up to the International Space Station. So it's pretty busy. You know, we've got the space station program that's going on. We've got this commercial program that's ramping up rather rapidly, and all the development for Orion that's coming up. So people are working pretty hard all throughout the country to get all of these space systems going.
That reminds me of one of the questions we got from Celine from Twitter. She asked, where do you train?
It's a good question. Where will we train? The space station crews, you know, that will ride these new vehicles will still have training all over the world to still execute that mission. But the vehicle-specific training will be a combination of some training in Houston, some training in Florida, and some training in Southern California. So all three of those places are really going to come together to bring a total training flow for these new vehicles.
Okay, and then user Fish and Chimps from Twitter asked, what do you think a NASA astronaut's role will be in the future of human spaceflight, 10, 20, 50 years from now?
Wow, don't you wish you were 10, 20, 50 years younger? It's going to be pretty exciting. So, you know, we're in low Earth orbit right now on the International Space Station. We'll be going there with these commercial vehicles, which is going to be cutting edge technology, which is pretty fun in the near future. I mentioned Orion, which you know, has a bright future in front of it. It's going to probably taking the next generation of astronauts, unfortunately probably not Bob and myself, a little bit farther than low Earth orbit, maybe back to the moon, maybe onto an asteroid, maybe to Mars. So I think when you get a little bit farther and farther out, you know, maybe we'll actually be sending spacecraft on a routine basis to Mars, and that would be pretty spectacular.
And we talked about this as well ahead of coming into this, and part of that spurred by the questions that we were getting. Commercial crew is opening up access to deep space in a way. Could you explain how that is happening? What commercial crew's role is in opening up our deep space exploration?
I would say that, Tabitha, the way that we get that opening up is to kind of divide up some of the responsibilities and divide up some of the work that needs to be done to continue operating the space station at the same time that we go forward and explore. So we've allowed the partners, SpaceX and Boeing, to really focus on low Earth orbit, getting our crews back and forth to space station, and allow NASA to focus on SLS and Orion and maybe a deeper space exploration activity. So it really is a good division of labor and division of responsibilities versus having NASA at the same time try to develop a commercial vehicle or develop a vehicle that had the same specifications or requirements as those commercial partners. That would be redundant, and we don't necessarily want to do that. We just want to focus the resources where we can. We just don't have the infinite resources to have everybody do everything. So.
Right. Okay. The significance, too, for commercial crew is that it returns launch to the United States. We've talked a little bit about that. So tell us, what will it feel like, and I'll direct this to you, Sunny, when You're landing here, and you know that well, both of you, I'd like to answer this, I think it's significant. You're landing in the U.S. again, and your family and your friends won't need a passport to come and greet you when you return home. What will that be like?
That's pretty spectacular. I mean, planet Earth is home, so anywhere you land is home, but being right back here at home in the United States will be just amazing. You know, before us when we're landing in Kazakhstan, it's a little bit of a trek to actually get home to really hug your family and friends, and this you'll be right around the corner before too long. You know, that same day, that same afternoon, you'll be able to see your spouse, your kids, your dog, and really just say hi and be right back here at home. It's huge, and it's not only the landing; it's also the launch. You know, when you can actually share the launch with friends and families and people who just have to get in their car or drive their campers down to Florida, that's pretty spectacular. Of course, you know, people see it today on social media and in the press, but it loses a little bit of touch when it's all the way around the world. So when it's in our own backyard, I think, of course, a lot more people will be paying attention, and a lot more people will be aware of all of these programs that we're working on right now. And I think the kids in the country will understand that they're part of this. It's not so distant for them, and they are the next generation of explorers.
I think Sunny really covered the full gamut there with the answer to that question, and there's a lot of pieces of it. I think one of the things I tried to do over the last few years as the chief of the astronaut office was to make sure many of the astronauts had actually had a chance to travel to Baikonur, to Kazakhstan, to actually see a launch, in some cases to participate in the landing recovery efforts that go along with that, and then recognize the challenge and then respect what's going to happen here in the future. In just a few short years, we'll have the capability to do that all in Florida. It's really going to be awesome. They're going to really have seen, okay, there's the long way to do it, which is to go all the way to Kazakhstan, and then there's the short way to do it, which is to head down to the Florida Space Coast and see it happen from there. Sunny mentioned this. I do think that in terms of inspiration, in terms of speaking to kids and trying to motivate them to be interested in the space program and the engineering and science that goes along with that, it's a tougher sell to explain, hey, the next launch will be in Kazakhstan, the next crew will land halfway around the world. They're not quite as interested in it as when Sunny mentioned you can pack up in a family SUV and head to Florida and actually see the launch for yourselves. I think anybody who's seen a shuttle launch, or those that are, were around and were able to see an Atlas V launch, Saturn V launch, and actually see crews launch on deep space missions from if you will, from the U.S. space soil. They really, it's a life-changing experience, I think, and it'd be great to have more people have that opportunity to see.
I think you're both hitting on something significant, because a lot of the questions that we got related to the inspiration, and I feel like because they knew you were coming from a commercial crew, you would be talking about that. It does seem real to them. So one of the questions that we got over and over again from several Twitter users, one is Rania, is what should we do, or what should we study in order to be NASA astronauts?
Yeah, I think we're going to be looking for a lot of astronauts in the near future, and most of us have a science and math background, but that doesn't mean you have to be, straight science as some people think. We have doctors, we have a veterinarian, we have engineers, we have pilots, we have divers, we have teachers in the office, but everybody has a science or math background. So I would say pursue any type of background or any type of career that has a science and math background, and just be the best you can be and stay healthy. Your body goes through a rigorous undertaking to go into space and come back, and you just got to be healthy. So don't take advantage of don't take your health for granted.
And you were the former chief of the astronaut office, so what sort of traits would you look for when you're recruiting a new class of astronauts?
I will say that there's been kind of a shift over the decades, and we really are going into a new direction with commercial crew. There was a time when every astronaut was a test pilot, a military officer who had graduated from one of the test pilot schools, and that's getting further and further in the past. The commercial crew vehicles, we expect those to be operated by people that don't necessarily have a military test piloting sort of a background. That's one of the responsibilities that's on the plate of Sunny, myself, and the two other folks assigned, Doug and Eric, to make sure that we produce a vehicle that a wide range of people will be able to take to the International Space Station. Now, in terms of characteristics, I really want to focus on people, when I was selecting, and both Sunny and I sat on the recent selection board, on folks that did well at whatever they took to be their life's doing. So whether they were a scientist or they were an engineer or they were a pilot, the folks that really loved what they did and did a great job at it, it showed through, and those were the type of people that we wanted to have in the office. It wasn't necessarily, as Sunny pointed out, that, hey, I needed to get another veterinarian in the office. It was, I needed a veterinarian potentially, but somebody who had the right passion, if you will, for what they did and to do a good job and to be ready for all the contingencies that we had to prepare for.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And this is a big team, you know, and I think one of the things that we look at when we're looking at folks applying for the astronaut office is how well people play together, right? Sort of the things you learn in kindergarten. But you know, it's a team effort. You know, Bob and I and Eric and Doug are you know, put on this mission right now. But there's a lot more to follow, and along with that is a lot of people who support what we're doing and really get the spacecraft and everything about flying in space ready for us. So yeah, you have to be a team player.
Going back to Commercial Crew and being team players, are all of your peers in the astronaut corps anxiously awaiting an expedition assignment now? Are they talking to you a lot about it? What are you hearing among the corps itself?
I think everybody who doesn't have a flight assignment is anxiously awaiting the phone call that will necessarily present them with one. But I think there is a lot of excitement generated by the Commercial Crew program. Folks that are interested in that aspect of launching again out of the Florida Space Coast versus out of Kazakhstan. Now, we still will have astronauts that do launch out of Kazakhstan. We just will need to kind of preserve that parallel path. The space station is a very valuable resource, and we'll want to make sure that it's appropriately staffed to execute the science mission. But some folks will have the opportunity to fly out of Florida, and folks are all interested in us getting to the point where we're launching so that the next assignments will come after ours.
We need to move on, so the next guys will be assigned.
But while we are on the subject of assignments, we had a question from Baza from Facebook asking, have you been assigned to a specific mission yet?
So not quite yet. So right now we're all learning about both spacecraft. And you know, it's a pretty complicated problem about when exactly which spacecraft will fly and when. You know, there's a little bit of a traffic jam up at the space station right now with other vehicles coming up, cargo vehicles as well. So I think we're still in the development of these two programs, and Bob and I are learning quite a bit about them for the last couple of months. So we don't have an idea of exactly who's going to fly which spacecraft yet. We're getting ready to fly both of them as best as possible, and eventually that's going to work itself out in the manifest also, because it's, like I said, a little bit of a complicated problem at this moment in time.
I would just add that as we develop these vehicles, we want to make sure they get to the space station kind of the same way, that they have some of the same requirements in terms of what crews will need to be able to do, so that when the time comes to select crews and train them, that we've kind of got some similarities between the different vehicles. And so if we were to split too early and have one person just focus on one vehicle and another person focus on another vehicle, they may choose to do docking in a way that didn't allow us to kind of get any synergy from training perspective, or from the things that you have to know, or from a NASA operations perspective, it may become really inconvenient from a traffic perspective if everybody chose to do it a different way. And so we are trying to do a little bit of standardization, if you will, of the two vehicles, just so that they get to the space station in an efficient way, in a smooth way. That's really part of our role. And when the time comes that that's done, we'll be married off to one of these vehicles, and we'll head off to space station on it.
One of the questions that came up on social media was what you like working on when you are on station. And we know that the Commercial Crew program is going to increase the amount of time we have to do research on the space station. So could you talk a little bit about your favorite experiment?
Well, you know, one that I thought that was going to be just like, oh, interesting, was Medaka fish, for example. We actually set up an aquarium in space for fish. And, you know, at first it's like, okay, what, you know, is this going to change the world? You know, maybe not. But it's amazing what you have to think about to just put some type of project in space. How is an aquarium really going to work in space? And what kind of problems are you going to find with that? And how are the fish going to orient themselves? How are they going to eat? You know, what kind of light do they have? And actually, I came to find out a little bit later about what they were there for, which is pretty spectacular too. Is they're transparent fish, and apparently we were looking at how their bones were developing. They were young fish, and they were growing as they were up there. So it is actually probably, you know, science that's probably going to change the way we do things, not only in space, because of course bone density is an issue, but it also reflects back and helps people here on Earth who have osteoporosis. So this one experiment just seemed nice because I love animals. Really is very multifaceted and pretty spectacular. And there's a myriad of experiments that are like that include looking at what's happening to the human body in space for an extended period of time. Of course, we have Scott Kelly up there right now, and Misha Kornienko that's helping that all out, as well as new materials. And looking back at our planet, and all this is going to help us here on Earth, and also going to make us smarter when we're developing new spacecraft and new systems in spacecraft and processes. So the space station is filled with a bunch of them, but I'm an animal lover, so the fish stick out in my mind.
I wouldn't say that I'm not an animal lover, but I would say that the biology experiments, for the biology that they are the ones that I found the most interesting to perform on orbit, because I really think that there's a unique environment that's up there, and how we live and operate in that unique environment, how genes express themselves, the challenges that the body faces adapting, all of those pieces are things that will teach us more about what happens down on Earth. We'll have to understand the system really well if we can understand it in space, and that will inform us as we make decisions about how we protect ourselves or operate on the ground. And so I really do think all of that, the biology, loving animals, it's great to have a fish tank and other life forms aboard with you on board Space Station, but the science associated with biology is just remarkable that's coming out of Space Station.
And Sunny, you actually ran a marathon while you were on the space station, so I'm going to direct this question toward you from Cricket on Facebook. She asks, how does zero gravity affect your muscle tone when you return to Earth?
Wow, interesting. If you did nothing, you probably would come back a little bit weak, but luckily enough, we have some equipment up there that keeps us sort of in a normal form when we return back to Earth, and that's pretty important. You don't want to have lost too much bone density or too much muscle mass up in space. We're on a pretty rigorous program up there. It's about 2 hours worth of exercise, a little bit of cardio, a little bit of weight lifting with the advanced resistive exercise device. And most of that, of course, is focused toward maintaining muscle mass and maintaining bone density. And along with the nutrition program that we have up there, the food that we're eating, people are coming back in really good shape after being up in space for 6 months or so. And that's based on or because of the rigorous exercise protocols that we have. So like I mentioned, if you didn't do anything, you would definitely have some problems. Our body is formed and made here on Earth, and that's why we look the way we look. And being in space, it's going to start to change you unless you remember back in your mind why you need to come back here and be able to walk around a little bit. So the exercise equipment is really good.
Okay, so we're going to end with just a few rapid fire questions. I'm going to throw the questions out and you'll just answer them as quickly as you can. What's the first food you want to eat when you return to Earth from space? Sunny.
Pizza.
Steak.
And what's your favorite food on station?
Russian cottage cheese called tvorog.
Yeah, I like the spaghetti. Yeah.
If you could solve one space mystery, what would it be?
One space mystery. For me, the space mystery that I'd like to solve is, hey, where is the nearest life that's in outer space? And so there's a question of, is there life? I think there's just so much out there that's the answer's got to be yes. But where's the nearest is the question I'd like to
So
have
you're looking
answered.
for aliens, huh?
Looking for aliens.
October 21st, 2015 is Back to the Future Day, the day that Marty and Doc arrived in the future. The film predicted that in 2015 it would look much different than it does today. When you were a kid, what technology did you think we would have today that we don't have yet?
So from my perspective, I kind of thought we'd have some sort of a personal hovercraft capability. So I think if Marty had a skateboard that he adapted from the future and was able to fly around on, we really don't have a big change from that perspective, right? We can still drive cars. We don't have personal hovercraft or flying vehicles. And I was hoping that we would have that. It'd be pretty cool when we do. So.
But I'm pretty happy with FaceTime or any type of device that you can actually see somebody you're talking to, because I never thought that the Jetsons, phone was going to come to life, and it actually has.
And it's better than it's the video conferencing capability. Being able to FaceTime or Skype with your family is something that the crew uses on board Space Station. I'm sure all future missions are going to use that. And it always, even in science fiction movies, looks really clunky compared to what we actually have on the ground. So it's pretty cool that we've we've achieved so much on that front.
I actually got to see my dog from space with a like Skype type of thing that we have, so that's pretty neat.
That is.
Things do come true.
Well, somebody mentioned sci-fi movies, so I have to ask the question: is it Star Trek or Star Wars?
I would have to say for me, it's Star Wars. So.
And I'm a Trek guy.
Ah, there you go.
Gal, check
Gal.
gal.
Your preferred sleep, in space or on Earth?
My preferred sleep is after a good day's work, and I have that both on the ground and in space. So I have enough work to do to get a good night's sleep.
I vote for space.
Yeah.
Why?
Nothing hurts you. You don't roll over because your shoulder is bothering or your neck is bothering or anything like that. It does take about, I would say, probably a month, for me at least, to really get used to floating in there. But sleeping in space is pretty awesome. You wake up just refreshed.
You just gave somebody a great business idea. Favorite planet other than Earth?
Jupiter.
Probably Mars. I think it's going to be spectacular when we get there.
And what's one personal item you always bring with you on a mission?
I've always brought a ring for my wife now, and I think in the future I'll be bringing both her ring and a picture of our son.
Okay. All right. Thank you both so much for taking time to talk with us today. Thanks everyone who sent in the great questions with the hashtag @NASA. This has been a live NASA Social Chat. Thank you for joining us.